Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Beit Midrash. Good to have you here. Good to be learning together. Hope everybody had a good week. Yes? Lots of thumbs up. Glad to hear it. So, we're going to continue our learning in To Be a Jew today. Part 1, Chapter 4 in Feldman's book. And um, I am both going to apologize and do a little pre-Yom Kippur Arochet, but also ask for your assistance. I don't know if my brain was just not comprehending. There were parts of this where I think I understood where he was going, but I'm not entirely sure I understood where he was going on some of it. So you might need to be teaching me a little bit today, because I'm not sure I completely followed everything, but I think I got some basics down. So, who wants to start? Any beginning reflections other than mine? Of anybody who might? Amy?
Yes. So, how funny that you started off with that because I really like this chapter. For me, I'm not saying I knew everything he was trying to say, but it just spoke to me. Unlike the first couple of chapters, being very honest, um, I felt like in general, I mean, because there were a lot of specifics, but I felt like in general, what he was trying to say is that we Jews, community of Jewish people, need to broaden our thinking so that everybody can come to the tent as they see fit, as in terms of what they believe, what their relationship is to God or not, how they see their Jewishness, how they practice their Judaism. Um, I just thought it was great because, like I said, to me, it was just, I guess, the overall word that kept coming into my head was acceptance. And at the very last paragraph, I'll just real quickly, these three sentences, he said, what I'm saying is that our conception of what counts as a meaningfully Jewish life needs to be broadened and strengthened. We need to see the beauty in the many forms of Jewish thinking and believing, including Jewish displacement and disbelief. And then he keeps, going on. But to me, that was the essence, and was acceptance and not trying to pigeonhole every single person who is part of the Jewish, part of our community, the Jewish Israel community. We need to broaden and strengthen our perceptions. Thank you.
Beautifully said. And, I agree. I think that part I got. I think some of the details I didn't follow, but the general concept I did. And that is the important part here. Sometimes, let's not lose the forest for the trees. Sharon, I saw yours next, and then I saw a couple other hands after.
Um, the hard part, um, that Einstein and Freud and scientific people, smart people, what Spinoza, who did not really practice Judaism, I guess. What makes them Jewish, as I understood it, and I was kind of waiting for your explanation, is an inquisitive mind, a wanting to struggle with difficult things he talked about. Um, Jacob, um, wanting to struggle, trying to learn, wanting to, it's our approach to life of wanting to get to the essence of what's important, and that can be applied to Judaism or changes in our search for moral justice or science. But it's just that kind of mind and way of thinking he was classifying as Jewish. I'm not sure I agree. That's what I was getting at.
Yeah. Again, with some of the details, I think I got lost a little. I hear what you're saying about the inquisitive mind, and that's that's the part that's Jewish. The challenge to that is there are Orthodox Jews, or not Orthodox, there are traditionalist Jews in his framework. There are traditionalist Jews who also have very inquisitive minds, who might also be very active in scientific work. So, like, saying that distinction, I'm not sure necessarily entirely followed. I think he might have been trying to make a slightly different point, but we'll come back to it. But I'm still trying to wrestle with exactly what he was trying to say too. Cindy?
So, to me, what he was saying, particularly like Amy, I like that last paragraph, but it seemed to me that that his level of inclusion is including Jews who, even if they deny their Judaism, they are Jews. And what I find really interesting about that, and he doesn't say this, is that if you think about how the rest of the world views us, that even if you don't think of yourself as a Jew, even if you're coming up with different philosophies to rail against your Judaism, when push comes to shove, you can't get away from it. I think he's saying that, and I think the rest of the world is looking at that too, particularly, and I hate when every discussion, I mean, it is informed by the Holocaust, but that's what came to my mind this time, that even these people who thought, well, I'm a step beyond Judaism. He's saying, well, you're still Jews. And the anti-Semitic world in turn, he's not saying this, I'm saying this. The anti-Semitic world in turn is thinking of you as a Jew. So I don't know, that's what came to my mind.
Interesting. Okay. I will have to think on that. That's certainly with the Nazis that plays out. That there were very secular Jews who I think would fall into this category of Jews without God in 1930s Germany and Austria, who would have fit that category, who were under Nazi definition were labeled Jews, whether or not they were practicing as Jews. How that plays out modernly, I'm trying to think through a little bit, and how much of that is still true. I think to some extent, some of it is still true on college campuses, but and in some of what we're seeing in the anti-Semitism coming up right now. But at the same time, there are Jews who are anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, who are being held up as like the righteous Jews because they are Jews who are anti. So I'm kind of just brainstorming in my head as we're talking. Yes. Are good?
Yeah, I think what Cindy's saying, and I think or part of what Cindy is saying, and that lays out pretty well right now, is that other people seem to take it upon themselves to define who is and who isn't a Jew. The president, for example, telling people, telling Adam Schiff that he's not a Jew. And I think that's part of the same line of thought, that it is not necessarily we who define ourselves, but the reality in the world is that other people think that they can define us.
Yeah. I push back on that a little bit because yes, I do think there are other people who are trying to define us, and that doesn't really mean anything for our self-definition, right? So I I can I can say, you must be um, you must be a traditionalist Jew, and the other person might say, no, I'm not. I'm an evolutionist Jew. Like, using Friedman or using a Feldman's distinctions. Like, you might say, no, like that's not me at all. But it's what other people say is not necessarily like how other people define us is not really how we should be defining us. Um,
Well, I wouldn't disagree with you at all. I'm just saying that the reality in the world,
yeah.
um, just as with the Holocaust, reality in the world is that
That opens up opens up a wide circle of questions of other isms and other forms of hatred and whether um, you get defined by the exterior or by your own self-definition. But Esther, you had your hand up before.
All right, I think I figured out how to unmute myself.
Excellent.
First of all, I kind of agree with all that has been said, and I loved, particularly loved, the removal of judgment of, again, what is a good Jew, what is a bad Jew, what is a Jew. But I thought, in terms of the intellectualism, I thought what he was saying is that the Freuds and the Marxists and they became those things. They were able to articulate those theories, and because of their Jewish way of thinking.
Yeah, that's
And
what I was trying to say.
okay, and I think that if they to not believe in God, you have to struggle with something, and that is what makes you Jewish. Is that struggle of sort of trying to figure out what is all of this about, and do I really believe it, and if I don't, what do I believe? So I think that rather than simply saying it was an intellectualism or because there are plenty of intellectuals, but they came to those positions out of their Judaism, out of their Jewish way of being and thinking and struggling, as we all do.
So I think the last thing you said, I think, is one of the important parts of what he was trying to say, um, which I want to come back to in a moment. I think the way I'm kind of understanding this chapter, I think, is similar to what Esther's saying too. But I think the way I'm understanding this is you look at the examples he's giving, the Freud, Marx, Einstein, um, all of them are not they're not devout Jews, they're not traditionalist Jews by any means, but they all are wrestling with this concept of God and what is the centering um, force in the universe. And if they're saying, okay, if it's not God, then what is it? And they come to different conclusions about what that centering force is in their wrestling, but it's coming from a position of there has to be a centering force, and so how do we, if it's not God, what is it? And I think where I struggle a little bit is I'm not quite sure why that's a Jewish thing necessarily. I think you could be a Christian without God, so to speak, and still have to wrestle with what's that centering force. But Joshua, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I think I have some of the same struggle that you did with that, and I think where I came to on it was I really didn't buy a lot of what he was saying about Jewish Marxism or Marxists being Jewish, except if you wanted to say, insofar as someone who's a Marxist or an atheist wrestled with what that meant for them being Jewish, then I was willing to buy that it had something to do with Judaism. And I think that's sort of fundamentally unknowable unless they tell you this is how I'm thinking about it or if they wrote about it. But I think from the outside, without anyone saying, I think about this in terms of my Judaism or they've written about it, you wouldn't know a Jewish Marxist from a Lutheran Marxist. And there's nothing particular about Marxism that really has anything to do with it.
I mean, other than they might be speaking in Yiddish. Yes, I agree.
Well, the Esperantists are talking in Yiddish, then yeah, you know something.
I did appreciate that story. That was a good story. But
Yeah, that was like one of the best and probably most obscure stories I have read anywhere in a long time.
TK, and then I'll respond. But
I just want to say that he talked a lot about humanistic Jews who were humanistic, who embraced humanism, but he didn't, which I thought was interesting, he didn't specifically talk about the Jewish humanistic movement, which is a big movement. There are at least 2 national organizations that I know of that are Jewish humanistic organizations, and we have a very small one here in Birmingham, or Hadash, and this group does not try to run away from their Jewish background whatsoever, but embrace our Jewish heritage and culture. And I just found it interesting that he didn't mention that.
so, there is something fascinating that there's something fascinating in Judaism that I don't think you get in other religions, at least not in the same way, where you can deny the faith, deny the existence of God, but still identify as who you are, and still identify as Jewish, even if you say, yeah, I don't believe in God, I don't believe in covenant, I don't believe in this, I don't believe in halakha, but I'm still Jewish. And I think if a Christian was to say, I deny Jesus as as the Son of God and as the Messiah, they'll just say, okay, you're not Christian. Like, that's kind of like the fundamental basis of Christianity. If you were in Islam, I think if you were to say, I deny Allah and I deny I deny Muhammad and I deny the authenticity of the Quran, they're not going to say, you can be a secular Muslim. I could be mistaken, but I feel like there's something a little different in the way Judaism interacts with it. I'm happy to be proven wrong, but I feel like there's a different way of being in Judaism that we can say, I don't believe in these things, but I'm still identifiably Jewish. Marged?
I think that raises the question of what is a religion, and is Judaism really a religion as contrasted with the other groups that you've talked about?
Yeah, and I think he made the argument in the beginning that Judaism is more of a family than a religion, which is an argument I've used many a time. Excuse me, sir. I have a box here. But yes, like, is it a religion? Is it a civilization, as Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan argued? Is it a family, as he's trying to argue? Like, it does beg the question a little bit. Joshua?
I think a good parallel when I try to think through these things also involves, like, say, Native American tribes, for example, where you can very clearly be Zuni, but also Christian, or you could be Zuni and adhere more to the traditional ways of the Zuni, which we would think of as more of a religion, and you have that sense of belonging of what you are that's a little separated from the religion part. I think Judaism has that dual aspect too, but they're just, the Zunis haven't wandered across the earth and been kicked out of as many countries.
That's an interesting parallel. I haven't thought of that one, so I'm trying to process it a little bit. Stuart?
Yeah. So the thrust of the chapter was a lot about whether you believe in God or not, and I think has practical ramifications. I mean, someone was mentioning about the Holocaust, but I mean, I know we don't want to be defined by external factors or other people, but that is what happened in the Holocaust. So we have to be careful. I mean, if we could come up with concrete ideas about what is a Jew, and apparently, if we all agree in this chapter that you don't have to believe in God to be a Jew, well, what? How do you become a Jew? Who is a Jew? And it's not. It has a practical significance about the right of return, for instance. I mean, if you don't fit into the Orthodox Israeli Jewish definition of who is a Jew, then do you have the right of return? So I do think there are practical ramifications, and it would be good for us, or for, I don't, and maybe it's going to come up in future chapters, to define what is a Jew, and not just do you believe in God or not.
Yeah, and I think what he's saying is, you can believe in God and you can be a Jew and not believe in God. That's, I think, what he's essentially arguing in this chapter.
Right.
Um, in terms of the practical ramifications, to my knowledge, I could be mistaken again, but to my knowledge, Marx, Einstein, Freud, they all would have qualified under the law of return if it, if it had existed in their time.
I mean,
So,
Marx's parents were both baptized before he was born, so probably not by modern standards. But the other ones probably.
possibly not, though, it did mention that. You're correct. The question would be whether they were forcibly baptized or not, but that's different. But too much. But point is that nonetheless, you know, that's not how law of return is not focused on that. I think it really only focuses on that in terms of those who have converted and whether or not they meet the Rabbanut's threshold, which is which is a very different conversation that we're not going to go down the rabbit hole of at the moment. um, but I think he's very clearly making the argument that it should, your faith, your belief should not matter. That what you believe in God, you don't believe in God, you can still be identifiably Jewish. I think, and I I guess my struggle with the chapter is I'm not conceptually, I'm not arguing with him. I agree with him in principle. I think I struggle with the examples that he gave of Freud and Marx and I'm blanking on the third at the moment, but the example Einstein, the examples he gave, I struggle to see how those examples prove his point. But I don't disagree with his premise on principle. I think he's correct. I'm just not sure I agree with the with the details and how he made his argument, or at least I'm not following the train of thought that these examples prove his argument. Um, Anybody want to respond to that first? Sharon, you're muted. You have to unmute first.
Okay. Kind of going back somewhat to what I said in the beginning, and I did say I wasn't sure I agreed with it, because I think there are many people that are Christian or not Jewish that also have inquisitive minds and struggle to learn and to know how the universe works. So I saw him in that part of the chapter presenting two somewhat different ideas. One was the inquisitive to struggle to understand the universe or how things are, whatever, which would include the Einsteins and the smart people that could be other people who are not Jewish. But also he was talking about the struggling with their own concept of God. And I don't know what these people did, but he's writing as if he knows that they also struggled with, is there a God? And that struggle in and of itself um, is a feature of being Jewish.
Yeah, and that goes back a little bit to what Esther said too, and that perhaps that's the unifying factor in all four of these divisions that he made, theological divisions that he makes, is that everybody wrestles. The Jewish thing to do is wrestle with the idea of God, and to struggle with what does this mean? What does it mean to be in relationship with God? What does it mean to be in covenant? What is it like? What does it mean? And sometimes it'll come down. People will come down as the traditionalists. Sometimes people will come down as the progressive. Some people will come down as the evolutionist, and some people will come down saying it does, like, there's no way to reconcile this, and I don't believe it. But the fact that I'm wrestling with it in the first place and struggling with it in the first place is what's Jewish about it.
But couldn't that be Jewish with any other religion? That, I mean, I'm sure that, from monks to, everyday person, that many people struggle with the same questions. Is there a God? What is God? Do I believe in God? I have a hard time seeing that is a Jewish factor.
I'll put it this way. I don't think it's a uniquely Jewish factor. I think, yes, I suspect there are some questioning Buddhists and Taoists out there, and doubting Hindus. But I think what is Jewish is the encouragement to engage in that questioning.
Okay.
That I'm not sure everyone else encourages in the same way. Cindy?
So I think that there's a few lines on page 96 that really explains it very well to me. It's in the it's in the bottom of the third paragraph. It says, Jewish godlessness, however, is not a state of ignoring God. It is, I want to propose, a state of struggling to deny God, and in the course of that struggle, displacing God into channels of thought that are nevertheless recognizably Jewish. And I think that's what he was trying to do, maybe unsuccessfully with the people that he chose. And he was just saying how their theories just supplant God. And so what they came up with really not necessarily new ideas, but just translating Judaism into a different form, sort of. But I think that's what makes it Jewish, is that they start as Jews, but we just argue that maybe Marx did not. They start as Jews, and then what they've come up with are really Jewish thought, like with different labels.
Right. Like, in some sense, Marx is saying that class and economy are what are taking the place that God used to take. And Freud saying the mind is taking the place of what God used to take. And Einstein says there's a more overarching universal principle, scientifically, that takes the place of what God used to take. Um, I guess what I struggle with in that is how how is that how is those particular examples still, I think I struggled with how are those particular examples still recognizably Jewish.
He doesn't really, he states that they are, but he doesn't really make the case, is what you're
I think he tries to make the case. I think I'm just struggling to accept his argument.
saying. Right.
That might be like that. I think that's where I'm struggling a little bit is, I get where he's going for. And I guess maybe instead of debating Marx, Freud, and Einstein, I think the better question is how do we see this play out in the world around us today? So, how do we see those? Like, I think I haven't heard anybody deny the fact that you can deny or see as irrelevant or displace God from the equation, but still be recognizably Jewish.
No.
But
I
if
think
we're
it
if
depends who
we're
you talk
struggling
to.
to accept his particular examples, what are better examples?
I think it depends who you talk to and what you mean by Jewish. The ethnic aspect, probably nobody's going to say you're not Jewish. Religiously speaking, I think there are plenty of authorities who'd say if you deny God and, if Maimonides deny the Torah and deny the resurrection of the dead, then you're really not Jewish. So it depends on what you mean by being Jewish. And I'm kind of with Cindy, like, I don't think he actually did make the case of what was identifiably Jewish about some of those things.
Esther?
Can you hear me? Okay. I actually think this is a very interesting struggle, and I kind of agree with what you're saying that anybody can be intellectually curious and deny God and all that stuff. And so my question about this is, and it comes back to who is a Jew? Is it simply the fact of being born a Jew? And what happens to the Jew who becomes an Episcopal priest? Is he still a Jew? What happens to the Jew who, becomes Freud or Einstein and develops a whole new theory of how the world works, or a different theory of how the world works? It's an interesting question, and we keep coming back to this. And there's something about, I hate to say it this way, about Jewish blood that feels like, it isn't going away. If you deny God, if you convert to Christianity, if you accept Jesus Christ, there's something about that feels like that Jewish root is always there, whether that's valid or for being a Jew or not. I don't know. I think it's just an interesting question.
Yeah, and to expand your point, there's an interesting question in halakha about whether if somebody was born Jewish and then, to use your example, became an Episcopal priest and decided to come back to Judaism, whether or not they need to undergo a conversion or not. Like whether or not they have to redo mikvah, whether or not they'd have to, if they were male, have to redo hatfat dambrit. Like whether or not that's a requirement for someone who has left and then decides to come back. And the fact that it's a debate and not just a clear-cut answer is, I think, kind of what you're saying too. Is that the fact that, okay, you left, but you didn't really leave. Like you're still you. So you don't. There's a possibility you might not have to do anything, because you never really left. And going back to the introduction, he says, I will offer an extended comparison. This is bottom of 14 if you want to look it up. But I will offer an extended comparison of the Jewish people to a family. Not the simplistic structure of birth, parent, and biological offspring, but the real world complex structures of attachment by adoption, accident, choice, creativity, friendship, love, hate, and above all, imagination. Um, you know, families as a families are diverse. Um, we're not uniform in our, just because we're family doesn't mean we all necessarily believe on the same thing or agree on the same things together. Um, as a family, we had watched the TV show Modern Family a few months back. Just watch that show, you get a sense of it. Like, it's particularly now, things are not uniform, and um, there's a word, we're not all the same. There's a word I couldn't quite think of. So yeah, we might have deep debates about who we are and what we believe and who's in and who's out, but you're still in, um, and you might not agree with me, but you're still part of the family. Margaret?
And often I hear people say, "Welcome to the tribe," which goes goes along with what Josh said earlier. Good parallel. I think one of the things that crystallized for me that I had difficulty with in this chapter was his use of the word displacement. By that Judaism was displaced. Like we were like another.
I think I looks like I might not be. I think I'm losing you a little bit. Like I missed some of what you just said.
Okay, well, what I was trying to say was the idea of displacement, so that these Marxism or Freudianism or so on were somehow were a displacement of the of Judaism was something that did not sit well with me. I didn't think that was a good.
Why not?
Because it implies that it implies that that by going in these other intellectual directions were a substitution for Judaism rather than I'll leave it at that. We're a substitution.
Yeah. I don't think he's arguing these were a substitution for Judaism. I think he's saying they were very Jewish. They were a substitute for God.
Okay. Maybe you're right.
That's,
Maybe.
I think, where the quote Cindy, I think, quoted earlier, is that they're replacing God with something else, but it's still Jewish. But
Thank you for that. That makes it a little more. I also found this chapter places different.
So, in the past, in our conversations, some of you have mentioned that you struggle with the concept of God, or you're not sure you necessarily believe in God. So, you know, I'm just putting it out there. So, for someone who yourself or someone else, um, what would you know what would make what they're doing identifiably Jewish if they don't believe in God? Like, let's try to, if we're struggling with the argument he's making, let's try to remake it for him, in a sense. Esther?
So for me, it's just two things, and I don't know that this was his argument, but from even some of this discussion, how a person identifies themselves and how the world identifies. So that may be through, roots, or who they were born to, how they were raised, or how they see themselves. And part of what I'm thinking about this book is that he's saying all of those are valid. And any way you get there is valid, and we should be celebrating, accepting, whatever.
I think crucially, he's saying every one of those is valid to somebody, but they're not going to be valid to everybody. The ultra orthodox will not take it as valid if you have a Jewish father who didn't ever raise you as anything but a Buddhist. But there are definitely Jews who will, and that's fine. Fine by me, anyway.
Yeah, I think he's saying some people won't accept it, but we should. That, we, in some sense, we kind of need everybody to be a part of the family.
I mean, I'm taking him at his word that he's trying to give us different perspectives without trying to put his thumb on the scale. So I think really he's saying, like, this is a view, but I don't think he's telling us this has to be our view or should be our view. He's saying this is a view and it's defensible. But yes. I'm not going to take him that he's actually defending any of these things personally. He's trying to tell us that it makes sense and you can do that and it's reasonable.
Why don't you speak, Diane? It seems like the rabbi is busy.
Okay. So I like the piece of what Esther just said about how the world views you. And I think that to me is huge, because if the world considers you Jewish, Jewish people may or may not consider you Jewish, but you don't have any other place to go. Your home is in the Jewish community because the rest of the world doesn't see that you fit anywhere except with the Jewish people. And we've seen that throughout history. I remember as a kid in Chattanooga, they would have revivals and they'd have a big sign that the rabbi is going to speak tonight. Well, they weren't getting anybody from the conservative or Orthodox community. They were getting someone who was connected to the Jewish community. He designated himself as a rabbi, and that's how they saw him. So, so I think a big piece to me is how the world views you, because you have a hard time. Oh, the rabbi, we can't hear you. You're muted. You're muted, Rabbi.
He's not talking to us.
Something
Okay. So anyway, that's just my very strong feeling. That's why all those people, with the different beliefs are still called Jews, because nobody else will take them in.
So Diane, we had that same rabbi come to town. I don't remember his name. And so the Baptist would bring a man to town to preach to the Jews and would put up posters. And I followed behind on my bicycle and tore all the posters down. So I'm very familiar with that. I also know Esther's Episcopal priest who grew up in my congregation. So if I see him, I really want to ask him if he considers himself to be a Jew. In my family, we had more discussions about who is a Jew than we had discussions about God. I had an aunt that grew up in a rabbi's house, and she said that she could choose to be a Jew or not. And I told her that, everybody considers you to be a Jew, but therefore you are. In this small town, you can't divorce yourself from that, but she thought she could. So I think it does depend on your personal experience and environment you grow up in.
Say, I apologize for having to duck a step for muting for a moment. The repairman was just finishing up and wanted to make sure everything was working before he left. I had a good friend who was a Unitarian Universalist minister in Savannah. I don't know where he is now currently. He's moved a couple times, but his maternal grandparents were Jewish, and so he's like, and he shared their story a couple of times, and said, like technically I'm Jewish. Like technically you're not because you're a Unitarian Universalist minister. And so I remember one time he was buying the chametz from us for Passover. Um, and the contract says, I'm selling to this person who is not Jewish. And he actually asked me, he's like, well, technically I am. So like, is there something else we can put? I'm like, so I had changed. I said, who is halachically not a Jew? And he's like, okay, that's fine. He was happy with that. But yes, that does go back to Esther's question. It does beg the question a little bit. Barbara.
I think another side of the discussion is who is not a Jew, because we're bringing up the rabbi from the Baptist church who talked. What about the Messianic rabbi? Because not me personally, but there are Jews who say you're not Jewish. And yet he is answering that question differently and saying, I am Jewish, but I believe in a different, I don't know what you want to call it. I believe in Jesus. So Messianic kind of creates the same situation of who is Jewish, well, who's not.
Yeah, and I'm not sure, unless he does it in the next chapter, I'm not sure he really addresses that question.
For those Messianic Jews, also, some of them were originally Jewish and consider themselves completed Jews.
That's true for the local, I don't remember his name, but that's the local Jewish, the local Messianic rabbi was, and he and his wife, I think both were originally Jewish. I don't know them.
So, that's an interesting question is, he's focusing very much on who is Jewish and who fits inside the box. I'm not sure he's done so much explaining of who's not inside the box. And, even if you take his example of a family, families still have some boundaries of who is part of the family and who is not. And yeah, there are ways to join the family, there are ways to come into the family, but there are still some boundaries around it. And again, I don't know if he discusses this in a later chapter or not, but it does not look like he, at least from the chapter titles, it does not look like he addresses the question of what does it take to be outside of the Jewish box.
He does discuss what it takes by various groups to be counted as in. So I think the out, I'm not sure he explicitly talks about what's out, but there's definitely things that don't fit in the in category.
Yeah, although I'm not sure I believe in God, that the tradition has evolved, but it's still rooted in the tradition. The ethics are the primary. Ethics take the primary over the ritual. That God and the ritual and as the tradition is paramount. That's a pretty large box to fit in. So, is it, if you don't fit into one of these four, then that's the boundary? I don't know. Like I'm just posing.
Yeah, I don't think he gets to it in those broad terms ever.
Ellen.
I'm trying to fit this into my own life somehow. And I can't do a very good job of it, but we all know who live in Birmingham, Alabama, that there are certain social ranks that people are put into, and they're pretty strict. The children in the sororities and fraternities are children of those who had done the same thing. I'm thinking particularly about the fact that some of the social activities do not include Jews, such as the Ball of Roses at the Birmingham Country Club. I'm not sure, but I think in the late 40s, early 50s, I was invited to be in the this ritual that they had every year. And they called my dad. I never knew about this until it was all over, but it happened more than once. But on the first time, my daddy said to the person who had called him, well, yes, that sounds like a lovely occasion or something pleasant. He made up. And then he said, tell me, I think it's lovely and things are maybe changing for the better. And tell me the names of the other little girls who have been invited. Silence, awkward silence. He said, well, I'm so sorry, but my girls are not going to be token anythings. And that was the end of the Ball of Roses. A few years later, on the way to college, with my, newspaper printed picture of the one who got a merit scholarship. Again, the telephone rings and says, we'd like your daughter to, I can't remember what that one was, and I'm jumbling times and places. But the fact is, what made him a Jew, I'm thinking to myself, is that he acted like a Jew. Wasn't anything he did. He wasn't popular in the community and therefore socially unacceptable with all of his work for unions and the like. But it seems to me it fits with people who are in uncertain positions. What do? You do what's right. It was very simple to him.
Yeah, and I think based on Feldman's distinctions, I think doing a person's sense of doing what is right and how that person comes to the decision of what is right might differ. Even if they come to the same place, they might have a different process by which they come to that decision.
Yeah.
And I think that's a little bit of what he's distinguishing is what are the processes by which we make the choices of how we act and how we behave to make the right choice and decision. And our theology often affects how we make that choice. But what you bring up is a good segue for next week's too, which is the chapter is a significantly shorter one. The struggle, in which I think my guess, if I had to guess, is he's going to re-outline and summarize all of these, and then expand a little bit about trying to figure out who is where and how all that. So as we wrap up, as we read the next chapter, I'd be curious, and we'll talk about this next week. Where do you feel like you fit into the categories? And it might not be neat, but at least where do you see yourself now that we've kind of gotten a broad outline to identify where we are going forward from that point? Any closing thoughts, comments, questions? Kol hakavod, everyone. Appreciate your thoughts, your insights. Appreciate you helping me try to process this chapter as well, and look forward to learning together next week. So be well, stay well, and if I don't see you before then, Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.